Welcome to another episode of the Point of No Return podcast, the show where we go behind the scenes to understand the secrets and strategies of the most interesting Canadian technology companies. On this week's show, I had the pleasure of speaking with Joseph Khoubbieh, head of M&A at Valsoft. Valsoft, if you haven't heard of them, they acquire and develop vertical market software companies, enabling each business to deliver mission-critical solutions for their customers. And as you'll hear in the episode, they've been on a tear in the past few years, launched in 2015, and I believe have 75 acquisitions under their belt so far. A little bit of Joseph, he holds an undergrad degree in finance from HEC Montreal, as well as a CFA. He began his career at the Bank of Montreal as a research associate in portfolio management, then spent 3 years at Dundee Capital Markets in sales and investment banking before joining a Montreal-Based hedge fund. He helped start and grow the wealth management division of the business before joining a single-family office. And now he runs M&A at Valsoft. And as you'll see, Joseph has a very interesting background, similar to myself a little bit in the sense of, being born first-generation Canadian immigrant. We spoke about the investment thesis of Valsoft, like how they acquire companies and how they're similar to Constellation software, obviously a very big Canadian success story. And this notion of like the power of vertical software, right, which feels like it's just getting going, how he handles M&A with 75 acquisitions under the belt, and their value creation strategy, how they help grow and nurture businesses at the company. So very fascinating conversation in a world that I'm not super familiar with. I learned a ton, and I hope you enjoy today's conversation. Joseph, real pleasure to have you on the show. I know we've been scheduling a lot, and we're going to talk about your work and the kind of busy, kind of crazy, acquisition path you guys have been leading. And we're going to talk obviously a lot about Valsoft and M&A. But I'm going to obviously ask the first, obvious question here, just considering the background you have here. Who's your favorite Habs player?
Well, first, thank you for your patience. As you said, we've been trying to schedule this for 3-4 months now, and you're the most patient man I know. So thanks for having me, and looking forward to this. Obviously, I'm a huge Habs fan, and the two jerseys behind me are both from Saku Koivu, signed by him. The truth is, it was supposed to be one from Saku, one from PK, but the one from PK didn't fit. So I had to put two from Saku up there. So
Sako's a good choice, man. I remember, I'm going to date myself here, but I was in high school when he was
yeah.
drafted number one by the Habs, and I remember like, oh my God, Saku Koivu, like it was like such a big story, and obviously like been a huge fan, right? Like I think everyone remembers that
Yeah,
moment, right, when he came back and fought cancer. Just sucks he never won a cup with the team.
yeah, he's man. I love that player so much. He basically made me grow up as a fan. I loved everything he stood for. That moment he came back was magical. He just, I think, was in the wrong era, the wrong time. Never surrounded properly. Probably too small to kind of be the number one center. But we never really gave him the help. But man, he was a great guy. I had the chance to meet him a couple of times too. So.
Yeah. Maybe one hockey question. I follow less and less hockey, but at the same time, I do keep an eye on what your thoughts on the current team. Like, is Jonathan Drouin coming back next year? What do we think of Cole Caulfield? Like, I don't know. Like, what are your current thoughts on the team?
I don't think Dwayne's coming back, and I don't necessarily want him back either. I think we need to kind of bring in the youth. Cole Caulfield, Nick Suzuki, Kirby Doc, Jordan Harris. I think we have a few very good pieces, but we're a couple of years away from being real solid. So I'm definitely willing to be patient. I think we have the right management team in place for that to happen. But I think it's going to take one more year of cleanup, and then we can start aspiring to bigger things. Of course, if we can get Connor Bedard, then this is going to be much quicker. But so far, we're playing a little bit too well, and we have a little bit too good of a coach to for that to happen.
Yeah, we need to tank.
We're running out of time. We're running out of tanking time.
Maybe a little bit of personal history, man. Like obviously, I look at you like we're both, like not like we don't have the Quebecois Souche family names, but very in Habs history. Bit of your background, family history.
I'm effectively born and raised here. My parents came here when I was 2 years old, so it's all I've ever known. But we're Lebanese originally. Moved here because of the war. My parents kind of packed up and came here, and I'm a Montrealer first and foremost, and then kind of Canadian Quebecer and so on and so forth. But love the city, and have a younger brother that was born here, and yeah, that's basically the bottom line of the family history.
Yeah, very similar. I think for me, obviously, I was born and raised here.
I'm gonna
I
guess
didn't
you're
come.
Greek.
You came up. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's like, and you could tell by Southern Greece. So I get a lot of Lebanese when people ask me. And you mentioned the war, and like I don't want to get too much in history. It's supposed to be a business podcast, but yeah, like for me, what really marked me, you spoke about the war in Lebanon in the '80s. Movie Waltz with Bashir, which
Yeah,
I'm
of
sure
course.
you've heard of. And really kind of marked me. If people want to watch it, it's an animated movie, but it's like the most terrifying animated movie you could watch, like about that very brutal war. And yeah, I can understand why your parents fled a war torn country at that time to come to seek
Yeah.
a better life.
No, I think that decision they made is a great decision for me. It was a difficult one for them, but I think for the whole family, it was the right decision and a great one.
Yeah, what led you then to the world of finance and like especially the world of like high level finance, right? Acquisitions,
You
private
know,
equity.
I honestly don't know, but as far as I can remember, um, secondary one or two, I was always fascinated with the stock market. So my dad owned the dépanneur, and he would allow me from time to time to like be at the cash, and then if I was lucky enough, he would like leave for 30 minutes to go home, and I would kind of be in charge of it. And I remember the Journal de Montréal, I would just start by the end, read everything there was about sports. And then back then, there was in the middle section, there was all the stock prices, what they did the day before. And I would just go there and just like start reading them. And for some reason, it fascinated me. So I've always kind of navigated towards that. Then in school, there was a stock market competition. I participated in that, and it never crossed my mind to do anything else than investing in my life, M&A investing, and so on and so forth. So it's really what I did. My dad, as I said, owned a dépanneur, always been an entrepreneur. My mom worked at the bank and was more on the kind of branch credit side. There's nobody in my family that I can think of that even worked in investment ever. So I have no idea. I basically credit the Journal de Montréal, but it just happened that way.
Shout out to Quebecor. Yeah, that's a great story, man. It's funny you mentioned two things that brought back childhood memories. One, like my father didn't have a dépanneur, but he had a fruit store, right, corner of Crémazie in Saint Denis, and that was very cheap child labor. Like doing the cash register and deliveries
Yeah,
at like the age of 10, and selling the Journal de Montréal. I remember
yeah.
like kind of like you also reading the sports first and having having that influence. Um, and you spoke obviously about this this drive a little bit chip on your shoulder. I see like I find that's a similar part where it's like, hey, we grew up like with immigrant parents and also kind of want to make your way. You find that affects a little bit your style and your let's say your level of competition professionally, then like kind of feel that, hey, like I got this opportunity and I kind of owe it to my background, my parents, and to kind of like succeed in life.
For sure, I owe it to my parents, because they drove into me the desire to be successful, not necessarily by saying, look, there's better things that are dependent and so on and so forth, but rather by saying, look, as long as you have good grades and you work hard, good things will happen, right? So they had this mentality where if you like have building blocks, nothing else really mattered. So, like, it was okay for me to come back late at night if I stayed at a friend's house, as long as I had good grades and worked hard, right? And that just taught me that, at the end of the day, as long as I know what I'm talking about and work hard, I'm going to do fine. And um, that's, if I think of like the first job I got in finance and how I got it, it was really that mattered, not necessarily who I knew or what my dad did and so on and so forth. It was the fact that people saw in me that like all I cared about was working hard and winning, right? And I think that was all credit to them for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's maybe one thing of the benefit of living in a country like this, where there it is a
Yeah.
meritocracy, and like like our names are not very Tremblay or Girard, but we still kind of made it okay. Like we're putting food on the table. You spoke about winning, right? And maybe not too elegant a segue to talk about Valsoft, a company I see really doing well. We spoke about the torrid pace, and the reason you've been rescheduling the podcast is just because of this insane workload. Maybe before we talk about the nitty gritty in your role, just what is Valsoft? Why was it started? A little bit on the
Yeah.
founders.
So my partners, Sam and Steph, started the business 8 years ago, roughly 7 to 8 years ago. And really, what Valsoft is an investment company that invests in vertical market software businesses. So we look for vertical market software businesses to acquire all around the world. And the idea came from what's the best way to invest someone's money if you have those three criteria in mind. First, you're looking for a high return rate and the lowest risk possible. Second, you're looking for businesses that will stand the test of time. So you're looking for businesses that are going to be around 10, 20, 30 years from now. And third, you're looking for something in technology, right? And vertical market software businesses are extremely unique in that sense, in the sense that very, very few people know what they are. And there's enough of them that you can make a very solid business case that they're going to be around for a very long time and that business model is going to kind of succeed over time, right? So we started by acquiring one business to test out the theory, a second one, a third one, and then we just closed our 75th acquisition. Suffice to say, we're heavily invested in that theory, and it's worked out great for us so far.
God damn, yeah, well done, man. 75 companies, Jesus. And maybe a bit of the structure of the firm. Like, do you have like, is it like other outside LPs? Is it just the founders' funds? And then I'll get into maybe some other questions as to operations as
Yeah,
well.
the firm was started by a couple of my partners, or a few of my partners, I should say. Then about 4 to 5 years ago, some of the key initial employees were became shareholders. And then recently, about a year ago, we welcomed into our family a private equity firm out of New York called Viking Global. So the ownership is kind of the original founders, employees, and Viking Global. It's about as simple and straightforward as it gets. The absolute vast majority lies in the hands of the co-founders and the employees and the partners like myself.
Yeah, and from what I understand, it's not a P model, that classic P model of like, like we buy a company, try and increase its cash flows, and then sell it 3, 5x times whatever we paid for it in 5 years, for instance. You guys buy and hold the company,
Yeah.
right? And then use the cash flows from the company and help grow the cash flows, right? Is that a fair description? And then I'd like to maybe unpack and give the second level.
Yeah, of course. So you're absolutely right. We buy businesses to hold them forever, and the reason for this is that first of all, it makes you do much better investment decisions. You're not trying to optimize for the exit in 3 years, and 5 years, and 7 years. You're basically trying to optimize for the cash flows for the longest period of time possible. So you're not beholden to, something that you have to do for this quarter or next quarter or so on and so forth. You just want to do what's best for the business over the long term. And then we do use the cash flows that we generate from those businesses to acquire more businesses, but we're not limited to that, right? So every year we acquire more businesses than what our cash flow from the existing businesses are, because we see that there's a huge opportunity set and we want to capture it, right? At some point, is the cash flow going to become much bigger than the opportunity set? Hopefully, that means that we're making a lot of money, but for the time being, that's not the case.
Yeah, and they're using any leverage, using debt, or is it even equity?
We do use leverage in an extremely conservative way. We're lucky to have partners, a few of the big banks that everyone knows, that have supported us and that continue to support us. But I would say that the majority of our investment is equity in the form of either injection or free cash flow.
Okay, interesting, interesting. I like this idea of like keeping the business forever, right? So, and then is there a specific, let's say, form of ownership? Do you have to be majority? Do you ever do minority deals?
We've never done minority deals. We've acquired 100% of the businesses that we currently own. Um, we're not fundamentally opposed to it. It just sometimes becomes complicated. But we've done 75 deals, and they've been 75 structures, right? So if someone was interested in maintaining equity-like um, you know, uh, returns or equity-like securities in the businesses that they sell to us, we can structure it, whether it's phantom equity, earnouts, whatever it is. If someone wanted to sell 70% of the business and have us buy the next 30% later, we're open to it. It's just never happened so far, and it just never happened. It's not that we're opposed to it or we would say no absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And is an analogy, and apologies if I get this wrong, but like, would you compare yourselves maybe to Constellation software, right? From
Yeah.
for in Ontario, is that similar type of inspiration to what you guys are doing?
Yeah, look, Constellation is the company that we're most often compared to, and it is an incredible compliment, right? It's a business. It's one of the greatest success stories in Canada and maybe around the world in kind of the consolidation space and in the software space. We do, uh, go after the same companies. We do compete with them, but in a weird way, we don't see them as competition because there's space for both of us and many, many more. There are so many businesses out there. We have an incredible amount of respect for what they do. And they have a certain way of operating businesses once they acquire them. Our way is, I would say, similar but different. I think if you were to kind of put words on it that describe it, but perhaps not 100% accurately, we're probably a little more entrepreneurial. They're probably a little more rigid. um, Whether that makes a huge difference or not, I think only time will tell. But so far, we're very happy with what we're doing. The results are slightly different from theirs, but the ingredients are relatively similar. We look for the same kind of businesses.
Yeah, and yeah, I think it's one of these like great Canadian success stories that many people haven't heard about, right? Like,
Yeah,
its founder, CEO Mark Leonard. It's almost like a wizard. Like, literally looks like a wizard
yeah,
in like the one photo that you can find from the guy.
yeah,
But it's like, I've known a few people that have worked there, and it's incredible operations, right? The way they do it. I'd like to unpack the point you mentioned about entrepreneurial versus rigid, and the little bit the secret sauce, right? Like, you guys buy the company, you're then operating it, you're helping the founder, stick around for a bit, or then maybe replace the founder with another CEO. What does that formula look like to help obviously grow the business, grow its cash flows?
yeah. Look, our preference remains that the founder stays on board. We're certainly comfortable operating in a scenario where he wants to transition or she wants to transition, or there's a certain limit of time that he's willing to give us, or so on and so forth. But I think um, when you lose the founder of businesses like these, you lose a lot, right? So, our premier way of operating is to try to keep the founder as much as possible, right? As far as secret sauce, I'll tell you, disappointingly, there is no secret sauce. The businesses that we buy are so unique, and we want them to be so unique that it's really hard to have like a blanket approach to them, right? But there are some guiding principles that are extremely important to us. The first is defining what the business is, or the strategy of the business dictates how you operate, right? So if you buy a business that's in a market that can't grow, that has technology that isn't, up to par or up to standards, that has a very defensive position in the marketplace, that has a lack of talent in the organization, and you trying to grow that business, at all costs, it's not going to work, right? So the strategy that you're going to apply there is going to be a strategy that's going to, maximize profits and maintain growth. Let's put it this way, right? But if you buy a business that is the leader in its space, that has good technology, good people, and that has the ability to grow within its vertical and to make acquisitions within that vertical and to make noise within that vertical, and you kind of categorize it as more of a legacy company rather than a growth one, then you're going to end up killing that company, right? So diagnosing what the company in it is and its potential allows you to put in place the right tools for that company and the people within that company to get to that goal, right? So, but in general, what we try to focus on is a good mix between profitability and growth, and that mix can shift depending on what we believe the capacity of that company and the people at the company is for R.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, very flexible approach, right? Like we work a little bit in the world of private equity, and there's the buzzword of value creation, right? So it's like, how
Yeah,
do you then create value? So your approach, if I understand really at a high level, is this notion of flexibility. But then, how do you then approach it from an operations perspective? Do you have a team that's there to support the management team in place? Is it more laissez-faire, and you're providing only governance, let's say at the board level? How do you
yeah.
then build this?
So it's funny you talk about value creation, and obviously it's a super nice word to say, right? Like it has like two words. Everyone's like, I want to create value, I want to create value. But then like, what does that actually mean? That's when you have people starting to struggle with it. And the way we define that internally is we create value the second we buy a business, and then our operations extract value, right? So the most ideal scenario for us is a business stays independent, and all we have to do is kind of report on the business and give them a bit of guidance on what to do, and they come to us more than we come to them. But the truth is that almost never happens. Most of the time, if a seller is willing to sell to you at a price at which you're happy to buy it, there's probably stuff you're going to want to change in it, right? So for us, the transformation from a non-Valsoft business to a Valsoft business is kind of a two-step approach. The first step, we look at it very much like a consulting mandate. We have like a SWAT team of about 10 people, very, very in tune with what we do and very, very aware of what vertical market software businesses are. And their job is to go in there, diagnose, fix whatever needs to be fixed so they can hand off the business to the long term operator, right? And the long term operator's job is to take the business as it is when he or she receives it and basically get it to a cruise control that we're happy with, right? And we feel that the person whose job is to fix and get to a certain level has to have a certain mentality. And the person whose job is to take care of our baby for until they become an adult and then let them kind of go on their own path, those are very different mindsets. So we try to separate those two steps. So first is let's take a deep dive in the business and get it to a standard at which we're comfortable. Then let's hand it off to someone who's usually an expert in the domain, is an expert in whatever the business is doing, and that can kind of slowly but surely take it to the kind of steady state level.
Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. I like this notion of like you bring in the SWAT team, help them structure,
Yeah,
and then leave the team on the execution side. If I switch now, let's say pre-deal and talk about the investment thesis, the types of companies you mentioned a little bit before, Joseph, about like the key kind of things that you're looking for. You mentioned this notion of like obviously technology space, this notion of like opportunity set. Maybe unpack a little bit the investment thesis and the types of companies specifically in technology you guys look to partner with.
yeah. So basically, what we look for are vertical market software companies that have, somewhere in and around the minimum of $3 million of revenue, up to 20, 30, 40, even 100 if they exist and if they're willing to speak to us. And we want those businesses to have a raison d'être in the marketplace that's very obvious and that limits the amount of churn that they have. The most important metric we look at when we're looking at a business is churn. And what that means is how many customers or how much revenue do you lose every year, right? And that metric's extremely important to us because if it's a business that's mission critical, if it's a software company that's mission critical to its end user, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to churn from my software provider because it would create so much disruption within your business, and you would have to retrain your whole staff to use a new software solution and so on and so forth. So if your churn is low, it means that the software business is extremely mission critical and we're interested, right? After that, what's important is how much of the revenue is recurring, what the product looks like, what the market looks like, and so on and so forth. But those are secondary compared to, is this business mission critical? We don't care about the profitability of the business. We don't care about the TAM that it has. Those are just not important to us. We feel that in the vertical market software space specifically, profitability is a choice, right? we could choose to run our business extremely profitably, but we're probably not going to grow them as much, or we could choose them to run them extremely unprofitably, but grow them, right? And it's one of the only spaces in the investment world where profitability is a choice, right? As long as you have a vertical market software that's mission critical, that has loyal customers and great employees to support those customers.
And then how do you define your role, right? Like you're the one going out trying to find these people, these companies, right? Like in different, obviously different areas and different segments. How do you define your role, if I don't
Yeah.
mind?
Uh, if we relied on me to do that, we would be in a lot of trouble. The truth is, we have on my team about 50 people whose job is to find those businesses, make sure that they fit our criteria, and eventually make them offers, do the due diligence, and close the deals. Right. So Valsoft's M&A team is the largest in Quebec, or one of the largest in Quebec, and they're very well rounded in the sense that part of it is finding the businesses, part of it is analyzing the businesses, and part of it is closing the deal, right? So an individual that works at Valsoft is a complete M&A individual. It's not someone who necessarily specializes in one thing.
Yeah. And yeah, I think there's so much to unpack. Maybe I'll talk about the art of the deal, right? Like not to quote the Donald Trump book, but every like that. I think that's the part that gets a lot of glamour, right? When people talk about investment, like making the deal, and then you're kind of at the forefront of this part, right? What have you learned over the years? Any key principles? Because I find like I've seen a few deals, and it's one of these things. It's like you're playing chess, right? There's a few obviously milestones that you need to achieve, but it's a very human kind of like interaction game. Be curious from a high level practitioner like yourself, takeaways, insights, best practices. Like if you even see it that way, I'd be curious to unpack your thoughts on it.
Yeah, as I've kind of evolved through time, I've realized that M&A in general is the part of finance that is perhaps more art than numbers, than science, I should say. Like if you were to speak to the 75 sellers that we've encountered in our lifetime, and the dozens that I encountered in my roles before, a lot of them, when you ask them why they sold, the majority of them will say because of the connection with the buyer, right? They approached me the right way. They had the right culture. I knew they would be a good fit for my people and my customers, right? Some of them will say, well, because they paid the highest price, but this is much more rare than in your typical kind of finance transaction. So when you're like, why do you deal with bank XYZ, the usual reason is, they have a better rate on my loan or on my mortgage, or so on and so forth. When you talk to a portfolio manager of a publicly traded company, well, the valuation on that stock is cheap, and so on and so forth. But very few of them will have more kind of less tangible things to say. But an M&A process is such a personal connection with the seller, and is kind of a, you don't, like, I do M&A every day, but the sellers do it once in a lifetime, right? So for them, it's like they got to make sure that everything works well, and so on and so forth. So I would say the more I do, the more I realize that you cannot neglect the first call and the second call, and so on and so forth, and rely on the fact that either you're the only game in town, or that you're going to outbid anyone, and so on and so forth. In general, in the businesses, or in the places where we traffic, that matters, but it matters a lot less.
Yeah, yeah, the human side, right? Like I like what you mentioned about like you're doing a deal a week on average, and the person that started the company 10, 15 years ago, it's the one time, and they're
Yeah.
almost like probably the only time in their lives they'll be selling their company, right? So it's a big friggin' deal for them.
Yeah. And it's so tempting to become impatient. Like, some guy's taking 4 or 5 days more than I'd like to get back to me on my offer, and so on and so forth. But the truth is, it's a huge decision for him. Whereas I have 4 offers outstanding, and I'm just waiting for someone to get back to me, right? So to understand their point of view is so important in the M&A process.
Yeah. What's changed in the recent years, right? You've been there for now like a few years, and you spoke about deal velocity, and like I don't know if there's a notion of like just the technology piece accelerating to a certain extent. We saw it with COVID, right? But yeah,
Yeah.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on how you see the market conditions now.
look, for us, we went through kind of three phases. First phase was, first of all, understanding what we do ourselves and getting comfortable with the way we do things. So I could tell you the first deal we ever did, there was probably like six people looking at it, intensely and debating the merits of this and debating the merits of that. The second deal we looked at, the same six people were looking at it, but you have a little bit less debate because you've experienced it once and then twice and then three times. So the ramp up in deal velocity and kind of the number of deals that we did and so on and so forth made it that in the first 3 4 years we were learning as we were doing the job, and we kind of became slightly better every time, right? Then we entered kind of the COVID period, and it made our life a lot harder, because number one, we lost the ability to go see someone and to understand kind of the humans behind the numbers that we were looking at, right? So typically, we're going to go see someone before the LOI, we're going to go see them during due diligence, and then at the end to close the deal, right? And during that due diligence trip, we would, sit down with a few employees, sit down with some customers, and you can get nuggets of information that can make or break the deal from your perspective. You hear an employee kind of say how great this developer is, and then you tailor your business plan towards what you hear in the due diligence process and so on and so forth. So you lose a little bit of that during COVID, and then as importantly, interest rate went to zero, and everyone had money, and nobody had any kind of ways to invest other than to buy everything, right? So we started seeing a lot more players into our industry, and a lot of them bidding, amounts that didn't make any sense, right? So that stopped about a year ago now, roughly. And we're re entering a phase of discipline, a phase where sellers have lower expectations and where buyers are real buyers that understand the long term value of those assets. So the conversations are a lot easier now than they were kind of from mid 2020 to mid 2022. And to be honest, we're kind of looking forward to that.
Yeah. Do you see an acceleration on the quality of the companies you see, like in the sense that technologies, vertical software specifically still feels like, yes, it's been around, like now 30, 20, 30 years, but if you just unpack any business process or like on the B2B side, there's like still seems like so much opportunity ahead. What are your thoughts on this? Like, do you like, we'll have to, like, your team of 50, do you see it being a team of 100?
Oh, big time. Yeah, I mean, the team of 50 was 25 a year and a half ago, and it's going to be a team of 100 a year and a half to 2 years from now, right? Because the opportunity set is still there. We keep finding businesses that we had no idea existed. And the truth is, everyone wonders if we're going to run out of companies to acquire at some point. And look, maybe. I don't know, right? But there's so much investments going in technology today that are going to become our opportunity to acquire 5 to 10 years from now. Let's say you start a software company today and you have the ambition to get it to 100 million, and it fails and it's a $4 million business, which by any standard would be a success, but by what you had set for yourself would be a failure. That's the business that we want to acquire 10 years from now, right? And there's a lot more of those that are being created right now than there are ones that we're acquiring or Constellation's acquiring and so on and so forth. So we have not yet seen the stop of that kind of cycle.
Do you guys have like a longer term vision for Valsoft, like where you want to take the company? Like, do you even see like mimicking of a Constellation and going public, or is that maybe too far out for now?
No, we do have plans to go public. Luckily for us, we don't have to. We will kind of do it when the time is right, and when there's an opportunity to do so, not necessarily from a valuation perspective, but more from a, does it make sense for the stakeholders, the employees, the shareholders, and so on and so forth. We think that Valsoft deserves to be a public company because of its scale and because it would help attract, talent and perhaps some leads and so on and so forth. So if I had to guess, we're going to be a public company, but not next year, perhaps the year after or the year after, that kind of time
Yeah, probably before the Habs win their next Stanley Cup, is my guess.
frame. Hopefully not, but yes, probably.
Joseph, man, it's been such a joy to chat, man, and like just learn, right? Like selfishly, I love this podcast because I get to meet smart people like you and just unpack what they do in their lives and like really cool work. My traditional closing question is if people want to reach out to you personally or just learn about more about Valsoft, which is like a hidden gem in this province, what's the best way?
LinkedIn. I'm sure you're gonna post it there, and you'll have my name on there. My email's on there as well. So anything LinkedIn, email is perfectly fine. I hesitate to give my phone number just because this is probably too much information to give, but shoot me a message on LinkedIn. We're always happy to chat, whether you're someone that wants to learn about the industry, someone that wants to work in the industry, someone that's curious about finance in general, someone that has a software company that's looking for a partner. All of those things are more than welcome. And whether it's me or someone on the team, if I'm too busy or whatnot, we'll pick up the call, we'll have a chat because, as you said, we're purposely under the radar. But I think we've come to a point where it's important to kind of spread our wings a little bit and start welcoming some introductions to some people that we may have a very good relationship with, whether it's business or personal.
Yeah, what's the expression in French? Là, se péter les bretelles. I think it's time. So
That not yet, and perhaps never. It's just not our style. But maybe stop hiding as a first step, and then maybe Petit les bretelles at the Stanley Cup celebration or something like that.
yeah, Joseph, man, it's been such a real pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
As always, thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe. If you want to learn more, check out thepnr.com.